prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Just Win podcast. That's Sean Reed. I'm Ted Wynn. That's Vic Tafer. And on the eve of the Super Bowl, we have some Raiders news, some big Raiders news. We haven't recorded since the Raiders have announced they brought back defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, which is a big deal, and they signed Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator, and they're making him the highest paid offensive coordinator or any coordinator in the league. He's getting paid more than a lot of head coaches in the league. I think more than half of the head coaches in the league. Um,
That's
I don't
true.
have the list in front of me, but I mean, 12th place is Sean Payton, I believe. But I don't know. We'll look at it later. But yeah, he's getting paid a lot of money, and that's part of the deal with bringing in the investors with Mark Davis. Is the cash flow is going to go up, and they use that cash flow on coaches. There's no coaching, salary cap on coaches, so smart investment, I think. Any updates from you guys?
We talked to Chip Kelly today. I think you mentioned how impressed he was with the whole alignment, the organization now with Mark Davis and John Spytek and Pete Carroll. And you mentioned the investors, also the new minority owners. So I think that really, he was impressed by that. I'm sure the check didn't hurt when you're considering leaving a national champion at Ohio State. But he was very excited. He's definitely didn't really answer any personnel questions. He hasn't looked at any of the quarterback stuff yet, but clearly that's his first mission, I think. But yeah, he's very excited about joining the organization and kind of getting this thing turned around with what he thinks is a great staff.
Yeah, I mean, $6 million a year definitely is very convincing. I think he was making around $2 million a year with Ohio State, so triple the salary. And somebody that he hasn't worked with Pete Carroll before, but he's familiar with him from way back when Chip Kelly was the head coach at Oregon and Pete Carroll was still coaching at USC. They had a couple of years where they got to face off before Pete Carroll made that leap to the Seahawks, and so there is some familiarity there. But it's also Pete Carroll kind of being willing to go outside his wheelhouse and hire somebody that he hasn't directly worked with before. And as we reported, general managers John Spytek, minority owner Tom Brady, they were involved in this process as well when it comes to putting together the coaching staff. So I think that shows that Carroll, he ran the show with the Seahawks, but he's more open to it being more of a collaborative process here with the Raiders. And then for Chip Kelly, I mean, I think it's a solid hire. The Raiders, kind of flirted with him last year when Antonio Pearson's put together his coaching staff. After the Cliff Kingsbury thing didn't work out, Chip Kelly was one of the candidates. It didn't come together because some disagreements about what the staff would look like and whatnot. But now this time, they upped his salary and the opportunity lined up to where he became a Raiders. So, like you said, I mean, he's highest paid coordinator in the league, and he's paid more than a lot of head coaches. I think Zach Taylor with the Bengals, for example, makes like $4.5 million. And so it's high expectations for him with that salary tag. Obviously, there's no salary cap, so there's no limit on coaches. But anytime you're paying a coach that much money, you're expecting pretty big things out of the offense. So there's a lot of pressure there for Chip Kelly, but he clearly believes he can handle it.
Yeah, I think we talked about the process of hiring coaches and Carroll possibly just kind of reverting back to his old coaching tree. And I think some people were floating around Gus Bradley out there. Bevel is definitely in contention to get hired as well. But I think it's a good thing that he is going outside of his tree and hiring guys with different ideas. And Patrick Graham doesn't run that Seattle system. He's a very scheme agnostic defensive coordinator who really caters to the strength of his coaches, the strength of his team. So we've seen that at different stops he's been, and we'll see what happens with the Raiders roster this year. But they're not going to run that Seattle cover 3 system that we're accustomed to seeing from Carroll, even though he did move to the Fangio system towards the end of his Seattle years. And then I think I had some reservations about Chip Kelly, just based on his time with the Eagles, and how it ended there and his time with the Niners. But I do give Carroll a lot of credit for going outside and thinking outside the box. Me and Tashan will work on an article about his scheme, but I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, Carroll obviously had some experience going against Chip Kelly at Oregon in the Pac-12. Did they overlap in college?
So the coaches you
Yeah.
showed you saying
So they
earlier.
played each other in college, and they definitely saw each other in the NFL. And I think Chip had a game where he scored a bunch of points, and then later on, there was a game where Seattle kind of shut him down defensively, and some of the coaches and the players were talking about how they were able to read the offense and predict what was going to happen, and how it's very predictable. And at that time, he was very orientated on tempo and going really fast and keeping the offense simple. And that works in college, but it didn't work in NFL. And when teams figured it out, they were able to stop them. And obviously, they were still able to score points against some bad teams, but against some of the better teams, they had a really tough time. But watching his offenses in college with UCLA and Ohio State, he's really changed his scheme and really changed his philosophy. He talked on his press conference about how college has changed, where they're running less plays now because of adjustments to the clock. So plays are more valuable now. So in the NFL, that's a big difference between college and NFL. Is in college there was a time where you're just running plays. You're just trying to get plays, and sometimes it's simple. Where in NFL, every play call is very nuanced. It's very valuable. Like you have to have a good call, and coaches will do what it takes to get the perfect call. So that's a big difference, and he noted that in his press conference, which I thought was interesting and a good sign for the Raiders, and that he's already kind of moving towards a pro style offense. You saw that at Ohio State.
You mentioned Bevel. He definitely was involved in the process. One of the guys they interviewed with, and I think he was some type of leading candidate until the last few days. But I think a key thing also is that, obviously Pete Carroll mentioned he wants to go away from a little bit what he's done in the past, but also this time around, both John Spytek and Tom Brady are involved in this process of picking a staff. So today, Chip Kelly mentioned that just how that last phone call, Tom Brady kind of really gave him a little nudge, and he really was impressed with Tom's vision and how he plans to help Pete however he can, and also the staff. So I think those two things are also important because it's just not Pete Carroll picking this guy. I think it's like you mentioned, the ladder of guys from Tom Brady on down who kind of wanted to go this direction with kind of maybe a more exciting, a more run based offense.
Yeah, and I get the fans that might have some questions about how Chip Kelly will fare in the NFL, just given how it went. I think he had a good start with the Eagles initially, but obviously things fell off the wagon there in the third year, and then the 1 year he had with the 49ers was pretty terrible. But as Ted said, it was a decade ago, and he's evolved his offensive system a lot since then. He said last year with Ohio State, for example, there's a lot of 12 personnel, there's a lot of slowing things down, running the ball a lot. They had 2,000-yard rushers in addition to the great receivers that they have at Ohio State. And it helps to have a roster as talented as Ohio State's, but I mean they hadn't won a national championship in quite some time, and there've been complaints there about their offense not being what it should be under Ryan Day back when he was calling the plays. So I mean, Chip Kelly made a difference there, even if he had a lot to work with. And so yeah, like I said, I think it's a pretty strong hire. He's shown the ability to be adaptable throughout his career. He's been a coach for quite some time. He's experienced play caller both in college and the NFL level. And so when you look out there at what their other options were, I think he's probably the best candidate they could have brought in.
Yeah, I think my top candidate would have been Nick Colley, the tight ends coach from the Rams, who got hired with the Texans. But I was surprised that the Raiders didn't interview him because he was one of the top offensive coordinates left on in the field. But maybe I think he wanted the Texans job because he wanted a quarterback. He kind of talked about waiting for the right opportunity, and as a coordinator, you don't have as much of as long as a runway as head coach does, especially if he has a good contract. So I think for him, it was about choosing the right opportunity, and for Chip Kelly, obviously the money talks, and he chose to go to the Raiders. But just going back to Chip Kelly's offense, one of my big concerns, and this is always going to be a concern with guys that go from college to the NFL, is protection. Like your protection scheme has to be way more complicated than it had to be in college because you're dealing with NFL blitzes and pressures and all those things. And that's one of the things that killed Kelly's offense in NFL is the protection scheme was too simple. But just looking back, I think he's made some real adjustments, and the protection scheme looked interesting and more complicated than it was when he was with the Eagles. They had some answers for blitzes. You can see that in a Notre Dame game. I haven't watched a Michigan game yet. And if the Michigan game is interesting because he's going against Wink Martindale, a NFL defensive coordinator. That might have been Ohio State's worst game of the whole season. So I'll go back and look at it. But the point is, I am very encouraged by going back and studying what Chip Kelly has done at Ohio State and how he's evolved this scheme.
Yeah, and I mean, from a staff standpoint, I know that was something that came up last year. I believe we talked about it, on the previous iteration of our podcast. It's not obviously writing it as well, but something that was an issue with Antonio Pierce and Chip Kelly was the staffing side of things, and Chip Kelly was trying to bring a lot of guys from UCLA. Obviously, a lot of things have changed now. For one, he wasn't coming from a head coaching job, and so it's not the same situation where he's bringing Ohio State coaches with him, but he still will be working in concert with Pete Carroll to assemble the rest of the offensive coaching staff. So far, the only positions that we know for sure are Greg Olson is going to get hired as quarterbacks coach. He's should be a familiar face to a lot of Raiders fans. He's been an offense coordinator twice. He also worked with Carroll with the Seahawks, and then also tight ends coach Luke Steckel, who was already on the staff previously last year, and obviously helped coach Brock Bowers up to have the season that he's having. Looks like he's still going to be retained. And then Pete Carroll hired his son Brennan Carroll as offensive line coach, and Brennan was previously offensive coordinator and offensive line coach at Washington, and before that, he was at the University of Arizona. So he's another college guy coming over. But Joe Philbin, he's at least still on the website. He's listed as interim offensive line coach. I don't know if he would transition to assistant offensive line coach or have some other title, but he's a veteran president that'll be around, and maybe he can balance out what you're talking about there, Ted, with mixing some of the college protection stuff that Chip Kelly and Brendan Carroll probably have. With Joe Philbin, who's obviously been offensive line coach in the NFL for quite some time. So maybe they could shore up some of the issues that there could be there.
Yeah, offensive line coach is one of the most important hires any offensive coordinator could make, and I don't know too much about Brendan Carroll, so we'll see. I mean, obviously, he's Pete Carroll's son, so you see he's had exposure to NFL stuff. We'll see how he does, and yeah, I mean w- that's gonna be a huge hire. Whether he could develop some guys and get them up to speed is obviously going to be a big deal for the Raiders offense, and retaining Joe Philbin, a guy with experience, also matters. Uh, on the defensive side of the ball, Patrick Graham is returning. Um, did you guys get a sense that Graham? What were the? I guess how likely was it that Graham was going to leave if they didn't like up his salary or like how did they convince Graham to stay?
Sure, he had a lot of different options. I know you're still running for Jacksonville, but I think I think the pay raise something that they thought was deserved after the job he did last year. There were so many injuries last year, the defense kind of didn't really fall off the map. I think they want some continuity. I think all the players love him. I think also bringing back Rob Leonard as D line coach to give him a bump as well. So those two guys were kind of core guys, that defensive staff. Where I think the players really kind of turned to and really trusted and kind of really felt confidence in. So I think that's an important thing. We mentioned, even back when we were talking about Pierce coming back, maybe like what are the reasons, this could work. And one of the things we talked about was the defensive side of the ball. A lot of those guys were, were good last year. Before that, a lot of guys were hurt. So the idea that you can bring that core back, get some guys back who were hurt and kind of build off that. So I think that's still now a possibility with Graham and Leonard back.
Yeah, man, I think with Graham is kind of bigger picture. You got kind of go back to last offseason. I mean, wasn't really clear which direction the Raiders were going to head in, until Antonio Pierce emerged, with his interim coach run after Josh McDaniels got fired. People might forget, like Josh McDaniels is who had initially hired Patrick Graham. And so that's who he came here with. And then he had a staff change. And so I think him, not extending his contract last year was as much about just kind of seeing how things go with the franchise in a direction as much as anything, and keeping his options open. And as we saw, Antonio Pierce got fired after just one season. So, I think it was a smart move by Patrick to not necessarily, he was still with the Raiders and coaching with the team, but not necessarily tether his future to the franchises and that coaching staffs in particular. And, he has head coach aspirations. He's got had interviewed for head coaching roles before in this offseason, interviewed for the Jaguars position and was in the mix for some other spots as well. So I think he, if he had a head coach opportunity, he would have obviously left for that. In terms of leaving for another defensive coordinator spot, obviously that's not as attractive. Like, he already was a defensive coordinator. And if the Raiders are willing to up his salary, then why not just stay put? And that's what ended up happening. But I think there was a few different levers to it. But Pete Carroll coming in, being on the same page as him. Tom Brady has a familiarity with him because Graham used to coach with the Patriots for a few years some time ago when Tom Brady was there. So I think all of that played into it. I think Pete Carroll told us early on, he wanted the staff to be a mix of guys who were already here, new guys he's worked with, and this roster. There's going to be a lot of movement this offseason, but they're going to have some big guys that'll be coming back that were under the previous staff, like a Max Crosby or Christian Wilkins, or maybe if you try to re-sign a Trayvon Moehrig or somebody of that nature, it helps to have that continuity and accelerates that process when it comes to getting the buy-in of guys. And not to say that Pete Carroll would have issue with that, because obviously we know what he's about when it comes to his leadership qualities. But every team is different. You have to earn that respect with the guys, with every new team that you're with. But I think having somebody like Patrick Graham, who's really well liked throughout the locker room, and Rob Leonard and some of the others that they kept as well will help with that process.
Yeah, we wrote about this week. We wrote about how there's 8 free agents who were defensive starters last year. So that's a lot. So I think before they brought back Patrick Graham, you wonder how many of those guys will come back. But now you got to figure, I'm guessing at least half come back. I think some of those guys, Robert Spillane's a guy who, we talked about Antonio Pierce, how much he loved him, but Patrick Graham would always rave about him, how he was his eyes and ears in the field. There's kind of a consummate leader and energy guy who got better every year. So I think he's a guy who probably has more value to Patrick Graham than he does other teams around the league. So I think that's a guy I look to come back. And Tashan mentioned Trayvon Moehrig, who had a great year last year. He might be a little too pricey. I think he'll be very popular on the market. He had a great year last year, kind of playing both up front and closer to the line of scrimmage than he had in the past. So I think he's a guy who you may want back, but may not be able to. They have a lot of money, but I don't know how much you want to spend on a safety. But there's a lot of guys on that list who you might want to bring back, like Adam Butler, Malcolm Kuntz at a discount because he was hurt. So I think all the optimism we had about the defense last training camp can be had again this training camp. If you bring back some of those guys and you add some new players with the old staff, some new guys in the staff, I think that could be kind of like your foundation year one.
Yeah, and I think there's some fans talking about how Patrick Graham could be the next head coach in waiting, but I doubt that, because Patrick Graham has been taking head coaching interviews since at least last year. So he's ready if the opportunity presents itself. And I think, obviously he'll probably take some more head coaching interviews next year. And if the Raiders have a good year, then he might really be a hot candidate that gets hired next year. And if he gets presented opportunity, he's leaving. He's not going to wait 3-4 years at the very least for Carroll. So I don't buy that theory that he's going to be the head coach in waiting. I think he's more just ready to go when that opportunity presents itself, and coming back to the Raiders gives him the best chance, because you get your players that are familiar with your scheme. Theoretically, if they re-sign some of their guys, but you're going to at least have Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, a very good defensive line, and guys that know your defense. And also, you know what? I'm curious why, and I'm not saying that he's not, but I'm curious why people are so high on Rob Leonard. Like, everybody, like, I see people talking about him being the next defensive coordinator, and there's a lot of hype about Rob Leonard. I mean, where is that coming from? Is that coming from people talking, or are people talking behind the scenes about how good of a coach he is? Like, how are people coming to these conclusions?
I think look at the results. You not only have guys, the high-end players played well here, but the guys who filled in have kind of gotten better. Look at, Jason last year kind of came out of nowhere and played well. I think you look at Terry Wilson's guy. Obviously, not the impact people wanted, but he's gotten a little better every year. I think the other guys up front and linebackers, I mean, Spillane got better, and I mean, I just think that that's the linebacker, but I'm talking about the up front. I think just a lot of the part-time players and the role players. John Jenkins came in and had a role as guys who respond to his kind of coaching, his style of coaching, kind of direct and kind of hands-on, and obviously very knowledgeable. So I think you see the D line has been a strength despite all the injuries.
Mm.
Yeah, defense line had a great year in 2023, and even this year, I think they were better than expected given the circumstances of losing Wilkins early and Max Crosby being hurt for most of the year. But also, he's Max Crosby is really tight with Rob Leonard and thinks highly of him and lets us know about it. And that's usually a good way to get the rest of the guys to like you as well. But he did interview for the Rangers defensive coordinator position as well before they brought back Patrick Graham. So he's coached different positions throughout his career. In addition to defensive line, he's coached inside linebackers, outside linebackers. He's been in a few different systems now. He's a young up and coming guy. So I don't think I think it makes sense that he could be, potentially a defense coordinator sometime soon, especially if this defensive line has a big year in 2024, 2025.
Got it. So, last piece of news: the Raiders hired a senior vice president of football operations. Can you guys fill us in about him and what his responsibilities are going to be?
Yeah, so he's got one of these fancy ass titles that they have nowadays, but basically he's gonna be like, you know, Spytek's right hand guy in a sense. They worked together back with the Denver Broncos back in the day when Spytek was there when they won Super Bowl 50 over the Carolina Panthers, so they have some familiarity. Ironically, dudes also was I think high school friends with Josh McDaniels, which is kind of funny. But yeah, so he's just kind of like a senior personnel guy that's just spot to lean on. We see this pretty often last year. Um, when Telesco got brought in, he hired JoJo Wooden from the Chargers, kind of in a similar type of move. And so, assistant general manager Champ Kelly's still on staff and still is expected to be in that role moving forward. But the new hire that they brought in, Thews, he's basically going to be Spytek's new number two.
Got it. So let's take a real quick look on what are the off-season priorities for the roster. Obviously, quarterback comes to mind. Um, what else are we thinking here?
Yeah, I think just figuring out what's going on with the defense. Like Vic said earlier, they have so many starters hidden free agency. Which spots do they want to retain their starter from last year? Where do they think they could potentially make an upgrade, whether that's through the draft or another free agency spot? And so I kind of, quarterback's number one. I kind of just generally say defense because there's so many different positions on defense where they have questions right now. And then offensive line, I would say would be third for me. I think the offensive line got better as the season went on, but it was really rough from a run blocking standpoint for most of the season. And even pass protection really wasn't that good. And I know, a lot of that might have been because Gardner Minshew was holding the ball too long and Aiden O'Connell even had a tendency to do so and couldn't escape pressure because due to his lack of mobility. So I think those position groups are probably, the main ones that they need to try to address. And like Vic said, they have a lot of money. They have somewhere around $90 million in cap space that they can use and have number 6 overall pick in the draft. And then they could get a couple of compensatory picks in the 6th round. So they should have a lot of draft capital as well. So they have plenty of ammo. It just comes down to how to use it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see like these meetings they have now with Patrick Graham and Spytek and even Tom Brady. He'll be involved as far as what those guys' thoughts are on these defensive guys who were here last year. Like obviously we talked about Moehrig. He's a pretty obvious guy who was gotten better, was a big time college player. I think everybody would want him. But what about a guy like Nate Hobbs or Devon Diablo? What do Brady and Spytek think about those guys? Are those guys interesting? Are they kind of guys never really kind of got to where they should get? Are they role players? I think there's definitely pluses and minuses both those kind of guys. So I think those are the kind of guys who look at the 8 starters who are free agents who really don't know what the new brass will think about those guys. So we'll find out, I'm sure, when we see who gets offered deals and who doesn't.
Yeah, which brings us into our first fan question. We'll do a few fan questions before we get out of here. Which of our current free agents on defense do you think is more probable to resign?
I think we both agree Spillane's a guy. And I think ideally Merrick, but I just don't know how much they're going to want to spend. I do think he'll be a high price guy in this market. I think he's young. He's got the college resume. I think all teams want a guy, a safety who can do both, play center field and also the line of scrimmage. So I think he's going to be very expensive. And then if you love him, we mentioned they're rich. They can bring him back, but I don't know if that's going to be a priority. I think. Who else? Oh, Malcolm Kuntz, another guy I think will be. Again, pass rushers are not easy to find. So he's a guy who definitely was coming up, and coming to break out a couple of years before he got hurt. So, I mean, what's his price tag? So, those are the ones that jump to mind as guys you would obviously want back if the price is right.
Robert Spillane is the most likely for sure, just given, as an inside linebacker, like even though he's had a pretty good run here with the Raiders, like the market is going to be too crazy for a guy like him. Like you're not going to have to break the bank. He loves it here. He has a defense coordinator he has a tight bond with, so it just makes a lot of sense. But I think also Trayvon Moehrig, I feel pretty likely about him being back too. I mean, bringing back Graham. He also brought back safeties coach Gerald Alexander, who helped coach Moehrig to his best season of his career this past year. And they have a ton of cap space, and I mean, even if you have to pay him higher salary, that doesn't necessarily mean like his cap hit this year is going to be crazy because of the cash situation being better, they can give him a bigger signing bonus and spread out that cap hit a little bit more. Whereas in years past, they weren't able to do that because of, you know, cap budget issues when it comes to cash. So, and I mean, Pete Carroll, like, while he's working in collaboration with Spytek to figure out the roster, like those best teams they have with the Seahawks, he had two great safeties, and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas, and so I could see them valuing that position on the roster a ton, especially with Marcus Epps also hitting free agency, and Isaiah Poulimal kind of being up in the air, and they have a lot of needs, and so you could say draft a young cheap guy, but like I don't know, like if you have to spend that capital and getting a quarterback or whatever it is, and so I think bringing back Merrick, even if it is a solid price point, I think it'd be worth it.
Yeah, I agree on Moehrig. I mean, I think it's just like you develop this guy. The Raiders haven't developed a lot of young talent, but you develop Moehrig into a real legitimate playmaker. Like I just think it's bad business to let those guys out the building. We know Pete Carroll really values secondary guys. So
With Spytek, I mean, they just gave Antoine Winfield a huge, like, was it $80-something million deal last year? Like, I know Spytek wasn't the GM in Tampa Bay, but he was, high ranking member of that front office, and they invested a lot in him. So I think it fits with his values too.
yeah, I don't think they're gonna have to pay him close to $80 million. I mean, do you get a sense that he's gonna be top of the market value like that?
I had to look. He's probably the best safety in free agency right now, right? What you think?
He's up there for sure. I mean, again, it's hard to really gauge what other teams think about the Raiders players. I think we saw him every game. We saw the improvement, but I don't know if from the outside you think is he a tier one safety or is he a tier two guy? I mean, that's going to be the difference where you see where he slots in. But I just think based on his pedigree, Jim Thorpe Award winner in college, you got better. There wasn't a splash guy coming in, but got better. I mean, the first couple of years maybe a little shaky, but the last 2 years definitely got better and better every year. And last year really took over, the role up front and kind of showed he can be kind of a linebacker type guy. Covered tight ends and was aggressive, physical. So I think that would be exciting to teams to look at his age, as upside as being, even beyond what he is now.
Yeah, and I think obviously if you sign more Marcus Epps is probably going to leave like because they overlap because Moehrig kind of took over Epps' position and played it really better than he did. But if Moehrig left, maybe you could sign Epps for a cheaper contract, then have him play that role, and he was pretty solid in that role too. So that's an option. All right, next question by Go Getter 22. Overall grades on the coaching hires, best we've seen? Question mark. Sean, you go first. You graded out.
Uh, I mean, I give him my A. I'm not. I mean, I think I like all the hires so far. I mean, Pete Carroll, as head coach, like obviously Ben Johnson was the crown jewel, and we all know that. But we don't know how he's going to be as a head coach. You've seen those offensive coordinators that end up being a terrible head coach. They had one of them. That was a head coach not too long ago in Raiderland. So Pete Carroll, while he's older, he's proven as a head coach. We know what his floor is. And I think the coordinator hires, I mean, Patrick Graham, I don't think any of us have an issue with him as defensive coordinator. Say he's one of the better defense coordinators in the league. And then Chip Kelly, like we'll see. Like I know that he hasn't quite done it in the NFL and the level that he's done in college. Obviously, Ohio State, they had a lot of success last year, won a national championship, had one of the better offenses in the league. But I mean, I think, across the board, I like everything that they've done so far.
Yeah, I agree. I'll go B. I'll be a little more cynical. I think, yeah, Pete Carroll wasn't the first choice, but the goal is to bring stability to to his organization. They haven't had that for a long time, and I think today Chip Kelly mentioned his personality is kind of it's just so it takes over the whole franchise, kind of that enthusiasm, and it's kind of infectious. So that's a good thing. I think Chip Kelly again, probably a B because yeah, you can see why he's exciting. Also, you can see some of the concerns with him. I think he hasn't really shown he can do this at a high level in the NFL. But again, there's reason to believe he can. I think Patrick Graham again. I think he's it's good in terms of continuity. I think this team to be competitive next year needs a good defense. I think to have that, you bring the guys who had last year, your nucleus, and bring some of those guys back, and he's obviously a big part of that. So that also I think makes sense, and giving him a raise is warranted. So I like all three moves. I mean, I'm not going to say. I think a B is a good grade for me. I think I'll be a little more, even keel in my evaluation.
I would say A minus. I think Carroll fits exactly what the Raiders need at this time. They need somebody to build a culture. They need somebody with experience. Obviously, it's not the big splashy Ben Johnson type of hire, but I just think he's the right coach at the right time. I just like the Raiders' process through this whole thing. You know, I mentioned I would be a lot more pessimistic about it if they just hired the retread guys like Gus Bradley and Bevel, but I think they were thorough in their process of interviewing guys outside of the tree and guys that haven't worked with Pete Carroll. I like that Spytek and Tom Brady were involved here, I was a little pessimistic on the Chip Kelly hire, but the more I study what he's done and the more he's evolved as a coach, the more encouraged I am, and the more excited I am to see what he's going to do in the NFL. So I just think as far as process all over, I just think it's been a very sound process, and it's been a long time since we could say that about how the Raiders do things.
Yeah, I think Raider fans every year have to deal with the enthusiasm. All the new regimes come in, and these are reasons why the time is going to work. But I think that to be really hopeful this time, there's a good foundation for that. I think that you mentioned the stability they're trying to bring in. All these guys are going to be one-time, one-year deals, or ideally even 2-year deals. These guys will have some rope to kind of let this thing grow and develop and kind of get this thing going the right way. And also the money's behind it. I mean, that's never in the past. You can't say the Raiders wouldn't be outbid for a coach or a player, and this year you can. This year they've said it and they've shown it. They're not going to be outbid. If they want a guy, they're going to give him the compelling case why he wants to be here. And the cherry on top is they're going to give you a lot of money. They're going to blow you away with the money to make sure you want to come here. So that's why I think if they had been Ben Johnson, they would give him a ridiculous contract. And I think, but it didn't work out. But clearly they've said and they've shown that here our money. We have these new guys involved now in the ownership. Our money's here. We're gonna get this thing turned around, and we're gonna be aggressive with how we pick guys and how we search guys and who we hire and the money we put behind it.
Yeah, I it's it's an untapped strategy. I feel like for a lot of teams not to try to use a lot of your capital to put together a really great coaching staff, and not every team's willing to do that. I mean, and I think the fact that the Raiders are willing to do that and they have the ability to do that now is a big advantage. All right, next question by Brian, and I'm not going to read out all those numbers. Is Carroll's other son joining the staff?
Yeah, we were told he is. We don't know exactly what his role will be or what the job title is, but we were told he's coming.
All right, it's gonna be a family business. All right. Next question. Does Olsen mean a quarterback is coming home? And is it likelier to be Carr or Mariota by Bagley Sports?
I don't think that has any effect on. I mean, he'll obviously have a voice and he'll lift, but that's not going to be his decision. I don't think he has any preference to bring Derek Carr back or Marcus Mariota. Mariota makes sense, I guess, because the offense they may run with Chip Kelly, but I don't think Gray's going to get the table and pound the table for either one of those guys. I think he's going to his job will be evaluate all the quarterbacks in the draft, help out with the film studies of all the guys in free agency, and just kind of have a list of guys who fit what they want to do, and go from there. So I don't think Greg Olson coming back means anything as far as Derek or Marcus coming back.
Yeah, I do like the Marcus call out though for the Chip Kelly connection. I mean, if
Yeah,
as a backup quarterback, bringing a guy in that knows the system and can help the other quarterbacks. It's changed a lot since they were together at Oregon, of course, but he still knows them pretty well and knows his Chris core principles. So not to start or anything like that, but I think, signing if you want to bring in a veteran backup just to have on the roster, I think that could make sense.
Yeah, and Mariota was pretty impressive whenever he had to fill in for Jaden Daniels last season. I think even as a bridge quarterback, I think he could be a good signing.
Oh, bridge quarterback?
I
Marcus Mariota?
mean, he fits this offense, and he has that skill set. So, um,
as you
you don't. Well, I'll just ask this next question because it kind of bleeds into his answer, anyways. From Raider J, best free agent and draft quarterback for Kelly's offense. I mean, Kelly doesn't. You don't need to be a mobile quarterback to operate Kelly's offense, but it does help. I mean, it does open up his playbook. He wants to run those quarterback option plays. He wants to use the quarterback as a runner. And obviously, he's worked with Nick Foles and Mark Sanchez, who aren't real mobile quarterbacks. But it when you look at when his offense is best, I mean, yeah, when the quarterback's a threat, it matters. So I don't think Aiden O'Connell is a great fit. I mean, he could make it work, but um, as far as just if they're probably going to draft a quarterback, but if they don't want to start him right away, or if they don't decide they want to draft a quarterback this year, I mean, I think Marcus Mariota makes a ton of sense as a bridge quarterback. And as far as drafting a quarterback, um, I think, the more I watch Will Howard, the more I like him, man. I think Will Howard's I mean, he's a big quarterback, 6'5", over 230 pounds, extremely accurate. I mean, that's one thing that jumps off. He's very accurate. He's 23 years old. Um, I think was it Daniel Jeremiah that said some teams are talking about him like a day two pick now. So I mean, I maybe if Chip Kelly liked him that much, maybe he's a second round pick for the Raiders.
just looking up Mariota's contract, he made one-year deal last year for $6 million. So I think for him, that's got to be a great spot to kind of go back to as a backup. I can't imagine. I mean, that's a team that's on the rise. You can help mentor the young guy. I think knowing his personality, I'm sure he's a great fit there. So I think for him to go somewhere else, it'd have to be a chance to compete for the starting job, or to be a bridge quarterback. So I think I'll could ideally say, yeah, bring him in as a backup because he knows, Chip well and he'd be a good backup. But I don't know why he would leave where he is now for a backup role somewhere else. I think he's looking at the market probably as where will I have a chance to start? Where will I have a chance to actually compete and be the guy, at least for a little while? So if that's in the cards, then maybe he could be a fit here. But I don't know, just to be a backup, do you want to leave where he is now?
She's a backup there, but yeah, I guess so. Maybe if they want to keep him around. But um, I mean, yeah, like you said, Ted. Just thinking back to the press conference today, quarterbacks that he mentioned when he was talking about, guys that he worked with before. Michael Vick was mentioned. When he was with the Eagles, but he also just talking about the game in general. He brought up Josh Allen, he brings up Lamar Jackson, those types of guys. And to me, like if you want to get that type of guy, in free agency, just kind of as a dice roll, I think Justin Fields makes the most sense. I mean, he's I would say pretty easily the best athlete in terms of a quarterback who's hitting free agency. And oh, he played okay, like those first few games with the Steelers before Russell Wilson took over. And he's still a young guy, could have some untapped potential for them. And he hasn't had as much success in the NFL. And I know people are kind of down on him now, but I think he has a lot of those kind of skill sets and physical attributes that Chip Kelly that he's looking for. So I think he could make sense as like a 1 year deal if you want to potentially have a bridge starter type of guy. And you can still draft a quarterback even if you do that, but just where they're at in the draft is kind of tough to bank on anything. You only have the 6th overall pick. You don't know who's going to be there, if anybody's going to be there that's worth taking. We'll see. Maybe they make a trade up and know they're going to get their guy or something like that. But it's kind of hard to say with the draft. But I think in terms of free agency, I think Justin Fields makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think Justin Fields, he played pretty well last year until um, they started Russell Wilson, and eventually Russell Wilson kind of flatlined. And now there are reports that Steelers are thinking about bringing back Justin Fields over Russell Wilson. So we'll see with that. There are definitely some options as far as bridge quarterbacks that fit Chip Kelly's offense. And yeah, maybe they draft Will Howard at some point to develop him. So
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think there's anything. I know we're kind of joking, but like, if you take a guy in the third round, fourth round, like, why not? Roll the dice, see how they pan out. It doesn't really keep you from doing anything in the future. And there's plenty of quarterbacks you can point to. Russell Wilson was a guy that was a low draft pick and turned out. Tom Brady himself, was a seventh round pick or sixth round pick and turned out. So, there's nothing wrong with taking a shot on a guy on day two or day three, if you aren't able to get one of those premier guys in the first round.
I will add that today, Chip mentioned how he can adapt his system around the quarterback he has. He'll change the offense based on what he has to work with at quarterback. I think, and obviously, there's guys who talked about free agency and there's draft possibilities. But I mean, yeah, Pete Carroll mentioned how you can build a team around the quarterback, like build the supporting cast first and get work with the quarterback later. So I think that also could be a tactic if they want to focus on the running game, get that going, and the defense, and just plug in the guy for the time being, and not worry about making a splash in free agency, worry about signing a guy who you try to force fit in there. So I think there are a lot of options, and maybe some of them won't be as sexy as fans want to hear because they'll build the running game, the O line, they build the defense before they really attack the quarterback spot.
ideally, you could get Will Howard in the third round, but if he really likes him, maybe they pull the trigger in the second round.
I mean, some of these quarterbacks will get pushed up higher. They do every year. And this year, I know
Mhm.
everyone says there's two top guys, there's a drop off, but all those guys after Warren Sanders, those guys will rise up because teams want quarterback. Every team, even teams that have quarterbacks, want quarterbacks at some point. So those guys, like the Milrow, the Howards, and I mean the Darts, all those guys. Some of the guys going to make a rise and be the number three guy, and so you have to get a guy probably higher than you really would want to if you really want to add a guy in the second or third round, but. And I'm sure Will Howard would be the guy a lot of buzz now because of Chip Kelly and because of the title. But one of those guys will lack ranks between now and draft time. Would be a guy who goes late first or second round.
Yeah, and I think we, got to keep in mind also like all these pre-draft rankings and stuff. Like it's all guesswork. I mean, I think all of us on this podcast last year when the Broncos took Bo Nix 12th overall, we were like, what the fuck are they doing? And then he ends up having like the best rookie season that they've gotten out of a quarterback ever for their franchise and leads them to the playoffs. So, guys overperform their, quote unquote, like draft positioning all the time. So it's more so about what you think of the guy, what's your evaluation of him, and what you think he's capable of.
And coaching, obviously, your
Yep.
ability to coach a guy up and make him better. Some thing the Raiders have not had in the past. Maybe they have it now.
Yeah, but I mean, it is guesswork. But at the same time, if you take Will Howard 6 overall, I think there'll be
I
some
ain't gonna say
uproar.
do all that. Yeah, you gotta do all that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
but I mean, it's Super Bowl time, and we'll get more into draft work. Let's quickly talk about our Super Bowl picks. Maybe we'll curse a team. Tashan, who's your Super Bowl pick?
That's what because I'm sure fans are gonna hate this section, but we're gonna add like what's gonna be your favorite thing to eat on Super Bowl day since we're all food guys in here. But I'm rolling with the Chiefs. I can't remember what score I've submitted for the staff wide poll we had, but I think it was like 24-21 or something like that. I got the Chiefs beating the Eagles. I do think the Eagles had a better roster, but I think the Chiefs have the better quarterback and the better coaching staff, and I think ultimately in a close game that tends to get you over the hump. So I got the Chiefs three-peating, and I think I'm gonna go with some chicken wings. I'm gonna grill me some chicken wings on for Super Bowl. So that's gonna be my meal.
All
All
right.
right, Vic.
I got, you mentioned like look at it, and the Eagles definitely have the better roster in terms of talent. I think up and down the roster, they're clearly, I think, better, especially the trenches. I think on both sides of the ball and maybe in the secondary also. But it's hard to pick against the Chiefs. I think I got the Chiefs winning 33-23. I got, for the same reasons as always, I mentioned Mahomes and Andy Reid. It's just a lethal combination. I think Travis Kelsey matches up well. The Eagles defense can't really cover tight ends, so I think Travis is in for a big day. And I'm sure we'll be up in the press box showing his cutie pie, having a good time. But so he has a big day. I think I think 33-23 Chiefs.
Yeah, I think the Chiefs are going to win as well. I just did my Super Bowl previews, which are up on the Athletic. But it's going to be for the Chiefs is going to be about stopping Saquon Barkley, and the Chiefs' run defense actually has not been very good, especially in the second half of the year. But the Commanders' defense wasn't good. Run defense wasn't good. The Rams' run defense wasn't good, but they were at least able to force Saquon to be inefficient. They stopped. They had a bunch of inefficient runs by loading the box, but they got killed by the really long runs, like the 70-yard runs. The Chiefs are actually really good at stopping the big home run runs. They only allowed I think 8 runs over 20 yards throughout the whole season and 1 during the playoffs. So I think as long as you could, and they have a good tackling secondary. So I think as long as you could limit those big runs to about 20 or 30 yards instead of the big 60-yard touchdown runs, you could force them to be inefficient with loading the box. And the Chiefs are definitely going to load the box. And if you could get Jalen Hurts into some of those 3rd and 10s, Jalen Hurts has been better against the blitz this year, but um, Spags is a whole nother different animal. I think he's going to have a lot of trouble with that blitz scheme if they get him some 3rd and longs. And offensively, the Eagles have defense has been really good all year, but during the playoffs, they've been getting killed by tight ends. Tyler Higbee had a big game against them, and Zach Ertz had 100 yards against them. So I think they're gonna have trouble matching up with Travis Kelce. I think Cooper DeJean is a little too small for him, and Gardner hasn't been as good as he used to be in coverage. And Darius Slay, teams have been picking on Darius Slay too. He's been lucky not to get hit on a couple of more double moves than he has been. So I think Xavier Worthy is going to get a big player or two on Slay. So there's some points to pick on for the Chiefs, even though the Eagles have the better roster. So I'm going to say Chiefs 27, Eagles 24. The curse is official. We've officially cursed the Chiefs for you guys. So you can thank us later for that. But that's all we have for you guys. So make sure you guys subscribe and hit the like button on YouTube. Subscribe and leave reviews on Spotify and Apple. And I'm sure we'll talk to you guys soon, as soon as we get some more news and get closer to draft. Talk to you guys later.
All right, y'all. Peace.
All right. Hasta la vista.